Story 1. At 37, I feel like an adult. It is more about the responsibilities you carry. I ran a business that employed about 10 people. The pressure removed any childlike energy. Now, with a mortgage, bills, and work commitments, life feels even more demanding. For me, the pressures of life and independence are what make you feel like an adult. Story 2. Yesterday, I realized paying bills was scarier than any horror movie. Story 3. At 40, both of my parents died, and I realized that I was the adult now. Story 4. In your mid to late 20s, bills and responsibilities really hit. Story 5. I am only assuming since I am not in that position. When you lose your parents, or when you lose all your older relatives and become the oldest living member of the family with no parents, siblings, aunts, or uncles, that must be very sad. Story 620. Personally, I just remember sitting at my desk in my apartment, looking out the window, wearing my new watch and having the feeling, I'm an adult, wash over me. And that was it. Story 7. I am 57. I have had wives, children, homes, and businesses, but I am still waiting to feel like an adult. Story 8. Male, 34 years old, still feeling like I'm a kid, but my back and knees do not agree with my brain. Story 9. I don't think it ever hits. It's just levels of pretending, to be honest. Does anyone else feel like a kid with bills and a caffeine addiction? Story 10. After I bought a house, I began caring about the lawn and home upkeep, and I spend way too much money at Lowe's. I still enjoy bike rides with friends, playing video games, and tinkering with my dirt bike, but I generally have no idea how anything in the world works. Story 11. Maybe it wasn't an age for me, but there were many moments that made me feel like an adult. One of the most profound was when my teenage son called to say he had heard that his best friend had died and asked me to confirm it. Watching 17-year-old boys lie across a casket and cry uncontrollably was devastating. The gravity of that moment and everything that followed forced me to be more composed and strong than I ever had. Story 12. At different ages. After getting my driver's license at 16 and driving by myself. At 18 when I went to school across the country from my family. And after I graduated college when I had my first full-time job, my apartment, and was paying my bills. But when did I first feel my age? I am 47 and still do not feel it. Story 13. I finally recovered from my multiple near-death experiences when I was about 25 years old. Story 14. I'm 62, and I still don't. I'm not sure whether that's a good or bad thing. Story 15. I am in my mid-50s and rarely feel like an adult. Only when I pay bills do I get a hint of adulthood, and it brings a lot of resentment. Story 16. I started feeling it at about 13, but I only did it around 15. Having both parents absent when growing up can do some wild things to a child. Story 17. I'm 39 and still don't feel like an adult. I'm not even joking. Story 18. I am 19 years old and I'm starting to feel like a hopeless adult. I can't find a stable job. I am in debt. And nothing seems to make me happy anymore. Story 19. The day I heard from the manager of another division that I was a very good worker. Story 20. I am still looking for an adult to help me, so not yet. Story 21. At age 43, I started getting tired and wanted to go to bed as early as possible. Story 22. I am 20 and I have my own flat. I live 7 hours away from my parents, I have a job, and I make my own decisions, but I do not feel like an adult. I still feel 16, right? Story 23. I am 29 and have not felt like an adult yet. So I will let you know when it happens. Story 24. I'm 29 and haven't felt like an adult yet. So I'll let you know when it happens. Story 25. I am glad someone asked this, because I was about to ask the same question yesterday but decided not to. Story 26. When I started working to pay for my movie tickets, sweets, tobacco, puncture kits, and lunch, I was about 10 years old. Story 27. As long as my bills never creep up on me and I have a good nest egg, I feel like an adult and more responsible. Everything is on automatic payments, so I don't worry. Story 28. I do not know. This is kind of unrelated, but I am 17 and feel like I am still 13. Story 29. I was wondering about this recently. I am 27, I have a great job, I am in graduate school, I am divorced, and I have a toddler. I still often feel like a little girl pretending to be an adult. Life is fun but also strange and jarring. Story 30. I am 23 with a full-time teaching job, and I am still waiting to feel like an adult. Story 31. When I was about 14, I realized I was the only one taking care of myself and my siblings. Story 32. Feeling like an adult comes and goes. There is always work to be done on ourselves. Paying bills does not make you an adult. Learning to be in touch with your feelings and to deal with them in a way that honors them, while also being kind and accountable to yourself and others, is being an adult. For me, this process truly began when two things happened. First, someone I was dating told me I was the most cut-off person she had ever been with. Second, my grandparents passed away. My grandmother's death, in particular, cracked me open. From that point on, I reflected on what my ex had said and began to truly understand how fragile life is and that nothing really matters except how we show up for ourselves and others. I say being an adult comes and goes because we are always capable of growth if we are open to it. I am not the same person I was then, and I will not be the same person in the future. Story 33. If feeling like an adult means losing all joy in life, then I am 33. Story 34. I was working in a pharmacy. One day, a girl brought in a prescription for birth control. Her year of birth was the same year I graduated from college. A little part of me died inside that day. Story 35. I was 25 when I had my first child with $0 to my name. I am 28 now. It has been 3 years of struggling to balance work and life under a great deal of pressure. Story 36. Around 30 to 32, I finally understood what it was like for my mother to raise us and all she had to deal with. I remember vividly when I saw her as her own person, not just my mother. I think that was maturity. I was very lucky we had time for a phone call about that realization, and I thanked her. She died of pneumonia just a couple of months later. Story 37. I am 24 now, earning my own money and paying my bills. I still would not say I consider myself an adult, for sure. Maybe when I grow past certain things, I will think of myself as an adult. Story 38. I am 50 and sometimes feel like I am still waiting to become an adult. Story 39. I bought my house at age 40. I paid to have air conditioning installed at age 41. Story 40. I stopped needing my parents' approval for every decision. I was not rebellious, just self-assured. Story 41. At age 9, I cared for my newborn sister so my mother could go out and party. Story 42. For me, it wasn't an age per-se. The first time I moved into a new place and was able to furnish it with new things was a big moment for me. Story 43. I'm in my mid-40s. I felt like that in my first apartment 25 years ago, but I don't feel that way now. Why the fuck do I have to go to work every day? It's just bullshit. I just want to listen to my kids and call in sick so I can pick them up from school and do something fun. Story 44. When I reached my 4-year anniversary at my job, I realized I was working longer hours than I had in college. Story 45. At 34, I had a really bad car wreck, and it made me realize life still goes on and nobody is there to save you. The bills still come while you're trying to heal and get back to normal. It's a brutal reality check. Story 46. As a Capricorn, I'm gonna say 10, laugh out loud. As a mature adult, I'll say 30. Story 47. Around age 8, I developed obsessive-compulsive disorder, and it felt like the entire universe depended on me. Story 48. I was about 16 when I started feeling like an adult. I worked as much as I could outside of school and paid for nearly everything. I enjoyed living at home, though. Story 49. I started getting real get-off-my-lawn energy too. Story 50. Baby adult, age 16, taking care of my siblings, working and contributing to bills and so on. Story 51. In my case, I still feel like a good kid even though I do small repairs, work, help my mother with some of the bills, have savings, and watch the news. Honestly, I don't know, because sometimes I feel like a scared brat. Story 52. I'm 47, and when an adult is needed, I still look around for someone more grown up than I am. Story 53. I left my family home at 17. When I was 18, the army conscripted me for mandatory military service. It was not bad. It was an interesting time. Because of the education system here, many teenagers in the past began work at 16, entering a 3 to 4 year vocational program. You worked 4 days and had 1 day per week at school. That was normal. College is only for those who want a university degree. Otherwise, you get a job and receive certification. Story 54. When I started making the same excuses to myself that my parents used to make when I wanted to do something fun, I realized I was repeating a pattern. I told myself I should not eat out because I had food at home. I told myself I could not afford a Nerf gun right now and that I should skip buying video games because I needed to make car payment. At a certain point, I realized I had not bought a game I had been excited about for over 10 years, Cyberpunk 2077, even though I technically had the money at release. I eventually bought it on sale, but if that game had come out when I was 17 or 18, I would have skipped dinner for a week just to get my hands on it. Story 55. In your mid-40s, when you are in charge and everyone else is younger, you realize that it is your problem now. Story 56. I'm 28, with a solid job and my own house. I still don't feel like an adult. Maybe I will when I have kids. Story 57. I would not even say I started paying bills earlier than most. Many young people live in hotels and vacation rentals. My first place was a shared room, so my rent was a payment plan split in half for a cheap $600 room. I paid about $400 per month. On top of that, at about age 22, I had a good job driving for Amazon at a great delivery service partner paying $1,000 per week. I later worked for a different delivery service partner that paid less than half, so do not get excited. Even when I was paying $900 or more in rent, no one treated me as if I were the tenant. Every landlord, host, and other staff just waltzed right into my room. I do not talk to my family, but police and facility staff would call them to check on me over minor issues everyone experiences, like jaywalking or temporarily becoming homeless before finding a new place. When my family kicked me out, I was earning $1,000 per week. When I became homeless at age 25, the police and staff were 100% certain that calling my abusive family and giving them my new address without telling me was the right move. Afterward, I was abused and hospitalized, and the police smiled as if they had done the right thing, denying a 25-year-old autonomy. Story 58. I am 35, with a professional career, a house, a wife, and a child. I assume it will happen any day now. Story 59. Turning 26 next month. I got a new job that includes insurance because I could not get coverage with my previous job, and I am being removed from my dad's insurance this year. I had to use it this week to go to the doctor. Story 60. Feeling like an adult or just behaving like one? I have behaved like an adult. Getting a job, paying bills, saving money. But feeling like an adult? No. I am 70 and I still feel like a kid. Story 61. It was when I was 20 that it started to hit me. I wasn't a kid anymore. Story 62. I felt like an adult until I actually became one. It's like my mind ages in reverse. Story 63. When my mom told me I had to find my own way to college while still living in her house, I rode the bus from the suburbs to downtown for 3 years while I saved up for a car. Story 64. I was 29, and I had to choose between saving my dog's life and using the money I'd been saving to buy a house. I chose my family. Story 65. It was the day I decided to take seriously something nobody else really does. If others do, they only do so behind closed doors. My response was not mature, but it shed light on how people repeat problems and claim maturity. Story 66. When I was 20 and at university, I had my first major problem and my dad could not help me. I had a boyfriend I trusted who sometimes stayed in my room. I went to class and left him there. When I came back, he was gone. I messaged him and he did not respond. About a month later, I received my emergency credit card statement and discovered he had withdrawn 3,000 euros without my consent. He had gone on vacation at my expense, and I ended up covering the bill. I did not want to tell my dad because he was already having problems with his business, and I could not ask him for money knowing it would force him to delay his own expenses. Story 67. Probably 31 when I built my first house, or 35 when I bought my first brand new car. Story 68. The one where I had a job, my own place, and paid all my bills. Story 69. I'm 47. I guess the answer will come one of these days. Probably. Story 70. I am 25, but I still sometimes feel like a kid. I felt like an adult only when I realized I was doing adult things. Working, driving, and buying groceries for the month. Story 71. When my mom got sick, she could no longer take care of me the way she used to. Story 72. I am 36. Yesterday I paid off my credit card and then bought a Batman Lego set. I did not use credit. This is La Vida. Story 73. Honestly, I don't know. Deep down, I feel like I am 16, laughing out loud, even though I am 37. Story 74. I am 36. I still feel like I am just cosplaying as an adult. Story 75. I turned 31 in 3 weeks. This summer, I experienced severe sciatica pain and sympathized with my stepfather. We exchanged tips to manage it. I never felt older than at that moment. My body hurts, laughing out loud. Story 76. You are the same mental age in a shell that gets older. Story 77. Probably after I had children. Having to put others' needs ahead of your own will do that to you. I assume this applies to anyone who becomes a caregiver or guardian. Also, when younger people start coming to you for advice, you realize they trust your judgment and believe you have made wise choices in navigating life. I have had about a dozen apprentices work under me. They have many questions about work and about relationships, finance, careers, philosophy, and so on. I try to give them the best advice I can based on my experience. Many of the young people I worked with never had a good father figure, and I find myself partly in that role as they enter adulthood. Story 78. I was 30 when I had to divorce the same woman twice because of clerical errors by the court. Story 79. Today I turned 27, and I sometimes feel like I'm cosplaying as an adult. Story 80. I thought I would feel like an adult at 18, then 21, then 25, but I did not. It actually hit me around 28. Not because I suddenly felt wise, but because I found myself getting excited about vacuum cleaners and early bedtimes. That was when I realized I had become an adult. Story 81. The closest I've gotten was at 60 when my mother passed away and I was officially an orphan. Even now, I question whether I feel like an adult. Story 82. I am 35 years old and moved away from my home state. I have been married for 10 years, and we have 2 children under the age of 7. I definitely feel like an adult. Story 83. I still think of college as not that long ago. I remember the Denver Broncos winning back-to-back Super Bowls and the Colorado Avalanche winning the Stanley Cup. I woke up to my roommate screaming that a plane had flown into a building and there was a big scare at work about the year 2000 problem. Then I realized I am farther removed from college in years than it took me to go from birth to college graduation. Story 84. Between the ages of 16 and 17, I had a job, built my first vehicle, and left school because I wanted to make money. Story 85. When it was my turn to start paying the house bills, I laughed. Story 86. When I was 18, it was a fallacy. Now, 5 years later, I am laughing about it. I think you only become more of an adult when you have an independent household, pay rent every month, and organize everything on your own. Story 87. Recently, I have come to realize that there is no such thing. Story 88. I found out I am going to have a child at 32. Story 89. I am 66 years old. I have 2 little grandsons and my parents have passed away, so I guess I am a grown-up. I never really felt like one, though. Story 90. I am 37 and still do not feel like it, although my back feels like I am 90. Story 91. I finally got my own place instead of living with family or college roommates. Story 92. I started my business at 26. I had mouths to feed and bills to pay. I lost that childlike flame over time, but I still try not to let it die. Story 93. I don't think anyone ever wakes up one day and goes, Yeah, I'm an adult today. At some point, we just realize it happened sometime in the past, and we continue to scramble to be an adult for the rest of our lives. It's like not noticing the moment you need a haircut. One day you look in the mirror and think, damn, how long has it been this way? I'm 33. I have a family to take care of, and I'm still excited to fly spaceships in my video games late on a Saturday night. It may be reductive, but at this point in my life, I feel like the only people who truly feel like adults are those who find no joy in life except in cold monetary gain. Because money seems to be the main thing that separates who I was at 17 from who I am now. I call Jeff Bezos a real adult, and I don't think that's a good thing. Thank you for coming to my technology, entertainment, design talk. Story 94. The day my daughter was born was an oh shit moment, when I knew it was time to make serious lifestyle changes to be the dad she deserves. Story 95. I am 31 but do not feel my age and am very lost. Story 96. As long as you are around people your age, you will not feel it much. It is only when you interact with younger people. Story 97. Adulthood came very quickly for some of us who lived through 2008. Story 98. When I went to visit my parents for lunch, my mom said that lunch wasn't ready yet and asked if I wanted some ice cream while we waited. Story 99. When I moved out at 17, I realized how hard it was to survive. Story 100. For me, it was age 30 to 31 when I became an attending physician, but specifically when I had to start thinking about retirement accounts, emergency funds, life and disability insurance, hiring an accountant and a financial planner, wedding planning, saving for a house down payment, student loan repayment, and so on. I have been paying my own rent and bills since undergraduate studies, so that did not feel like adulthood to me. Even during medical school and residency, I still felt like a college or graduate school student. Story 101, 40 here, still a kid. I am amazed I am allowed to be a parent because I do not know anything. Story 102, I could vote and drink in a bar. I was living alone, had a car, and was working overseas. I was also making all my own decisions. Story 103, I am 39, married with one child, and I have a career. I have been paying my own rent and bills since I was 18. I still do not feel like an adult in the way I thought I would, or in the way I assumed my parents felt when I was younger. I am not sure it is a feeling. Sometimes I get a creeping feeling of dread if it is after 8 p.m. and I still have chores or work to do. Sometimes I feel anxious that I must maintain so many lists of household inventory, grocery lists, appointments, my child's birthday parties, and so on in my head and on my calendar. If that is what it means to feel like an adult, I would say it started when I was 35. Story 104. I was 25 when I moved out and suddenly had to pay rent and keep my job. Story 105. In my 30s, it mattered how clean my apartment was. You need to be organized enough to keep your things where they belong. You also need to have your schedule and time management at a level that lets you get through the week without feeling rushed. I don't think this is possible unless you are mature enough. Story 106. At 21, I moved out of my parents' house and discovered adult responsibilities. Story 107. The moment I signed my first mortgage papers when I got my own place in my early 30s without roommates, I felt that I had truly grown up. I had always helped with bills and had accounts in my name even while living with my parents, but an actual mortgage made it real. Story 108. When I started paying my own bills and handling everything myself, it really hit me. Story 109. I work a 12-hour day, go home to my apartment to sleep, and then work another 12 hours. Story 110. I am 40, but mentally I feel the same as I did when I was 16 to 18. I was never reckless, and I always had a set of rules I would follow. I do not understand what adult means. There is no line that, once crossed, makes you stop being a child. We are just kids pretending to have enough experience to know what is what until we find ourselves in a new situation and realize that we are just as lost as ever. Story 111. I officially felt like an adult at 42 because then I was the answer to life, the universe, and everything. I tried not to panic when I could not find my towel. So I hitched a ride with some Vogons and listened to their poetry, which, although rumored to be horrible, put my new feeling of adulthood in perspective. Story 112. When I realized sugar and toilet paper do not magically refill themselves. Story 113. I am 34 and still do not feel like an adult. I have never had a full-time job, and none of my part-time jobs have lasted longer than a year. I have never had a relationship that lasted longer than a year. The only time I lived on my own was when I lived in my van. It turns out I have severe attention deficit hyperactivity disorder and bipolar disorder. I am currently living with my parents and receiving treatment. It is a slow process, but I hope I will start feeling like an adult soon. Story 114. I don't feel like an adult until I have to interact with teens. Story 115. I was 23 when I purchased my first home, a year after I graduated from college, and I bought a brand new car. Story 116. For me, it was when I became responsible for things at work. I had always been independent and did not receive financial help from my parents through university. I moved in with my partner right away, so bills, household tasks, and chores never felt like more than the bare minimum. When the work I was doing began to have real consequences, that was when I realized I was an adult. Story 117. I was 18 when I was drafted into my mandatory year of military service. Survival training knocks the kid out of you really fast. Story 118. When dad died suddenly, I had to look after mom alone, in the middle of nowhere. My brother did not do a goddamn thing to help for the next 12 years. I was 41. Story 119. I was 23 when I purchased my first home, a year after graduating from college. I also bought a new car. Story 120. In some ways, I was self-sufficient at 25. In others, never. Story 121. I am 38. That change happened when I had children and became responsible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week for the well-being of other human beings. Adults take real responsibility for more than themselves. It does not have to be children, but it involves caring for the larger community around you. People who go through life caring only about themselves never grow up. Story 122. A rough international move effectively made me skip my teenage years because I had to deal with grown-up responsibilities. Story 123. When I saw my first credit card bill, I was about 20 years old. Things became serious. I began to behave and move differently. It has only become more serious as I have gotten older. Story 124. I was 30, not because of age, but because my daughter was born. Story 125. At 12, I had a job. Since child labor was somehow legal, I did not pay rent, but waking up at 9 in the morning to go to work made me feel like a grown-up. Story 126. I had to drag myself out of bed when I was at my lowest during depression. That day, I understood I was alone and that no one was going to save me. Story 127. I have not reached that point yet. I am 35. I think this is largely due to major life milestones being missed and being reset to zero so many times. I still live in a single bedroom. My bed is empty. No one waits for me. I did not become a single parent. I have no children, no partner, and I am unemployed. I have a couple of dogs, and everyone says at least you have your dogs. I do not feel like an adult. I feel like a failure in every imaginable way. When I reach that age, I will update. Story 128. I will be adulting for a while and then think to myself, fuck, it's all me right now. Story 129. I was born an adult due to a rare genetic mutation or disability. Story 130. I'm 20 and still sleep with all my stuffed animals. I will forever hold childlike wonder. Story 131. I am 28 and still feel like I am faking it. Adult responsibilities started in my teens and have been piling up since then. Story 132. I'm past 40 and sometimes feel like I'm playing at being an adult. Other times I feel old as hell. Story 133. I was pretty much 18. My parents were not generous at all. They gradually grew more and more hands-off in their parenting style throughout my adolescence. They dropped all remaining responsibility for me the day I moved into college, which I paid for myself out of pocket. I am of two minds about it. On one hand, I sometimes feel betrayed and abandoned because I did not have a support system as a young adult. On the other hand, I have seen people my age whose parents still treat them like 10-year-old children, and the lack of connection they have to the real world is staggering. At least I am glad that is not me. Story 134. 35. That's honestly when life started slowing down in my head, and I felt I was making far fewer decisions based on pure emotion. Story 135. Never. I am approaching 50 and still do not feel like an adult. Story 136. When you are ready to take responsibility for your actions and accept the consequences. Story 137. At ages 12 to 13, I was always an adult, dealing with adult burdens no child should have to bear. Story 138. I still don't. I think that's mostly a consequence of having a mental picture of the milestones required to be considered a functioning adult, then seeing them pushed far beyond reach with homeownership chief among them. Story 139. No matter how old you are when you begin parenting your own parents. Story 140. I am 36 years old, have 2 kids and a mortgage, and do not feel like an adult. Story 141. Before puberty, I was the only one doing housework, cooking, and yard work. I was fully responsible for running a household of 4 people and 2 pets, and I had to care for myself entirely when I was ill or injured. Story 142. I would say when I was 16, but that was a different time and way of life than it is now. Story 143. At 32, I bought a home. I realized how badly I would be affected if I ignored my responsibilities. Before that, I had been lax and assumed everything could slide. Story 144. Around 26 or 27, I started to develop genuine confidence. I felt like an adult when I became capable of adapting to challenging circumstances and doing difficult things. It is possible I could have felt like an adult earlier if those experiences had happened sooner. Story 145. I am 42 right now. I am traveling for the first time with my wife and our baby daughter. I have always had a nice beard, but my wife asked me to keep only the mustache on this trip. When I look in the mirror, I see the dad version of myself, which is pretty cool. Story 146. Wait, when is this supposed to happen? I am 39 now. I still do not feel like one most of the time. Story 147. I think this has nothing to do with age. It's only related to how long you've been feeling tired and repressed. The moment I truly felt I had grown up was when I comforted my mother at my grandfather's funeral. That was the first time I really sensed she needed me to be an adult. Story 148. I am 19. Abuse and no time to sleep or exist have put me on adult wavelengths. Story 149. I was 19 when I found myself on a Navy warship in a combat zone. Story 150. I was 30. It was less about the age itself and more that we had our first child then. Having a child forced me to feel like a grown-up very quickly. Story 151. In our mid-30s, when our children arrived, they expected my wife and me to do everything for them. 20 years later, they still expect it. Now we tell them to get off their asses and do it themselves. Story 152. I'm 35 and it hasn't happened. I do all the adult things. I earn a paycheck, pay my bills, feed and care for my pets, and take my medicine. But do I feel like an adult? No. I think it's just a way to shame people for loving things, calling them childish. Story 153. I am nearly 40 and have health issues. I feel like an adult. Story 154. I'm almost 45 and I'm just now starting to feel like an adult. Story 155. When you read comments, it is both funny and sad that people in different parts of the world have very different childhoods. In some places, children do not have a childhood. To survive, they must behave, think, and take responsibility as adults, even though they would be considered children in many other parts of the world. I hope that someday we will live in a world where everyone can experience childhood. Story 156. It was strange, because when I turned 25, I felt my frontal lobe develop and suddenly had an uncanny feeling. People say I act older than I am. Before 25, I still felt like a kid, even in my early 20s. Story 157. For me, it happened almost overnight when I was 39 and bought a house. 1 month, I was going on group bike rides to breweries. The next month, I was at a home show talking to contractors about rain gutters. Story 158. When I started living on my own and paying my own bills. Story 159. Who says I have? I spoke with my mother. She said mid-40s, and many others have confirmed this. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.